Hello, this is Cho of the Shiny Colors Discord. Welcome to another episode of the Shiny Review. Today we've got 3 new cards to talk about. The new produced SSRs for Hiori and Nichika as part of Parallel Collection, as well as the Working Snap Date Collection Toru. Keep in mind that all these cards are technically limited. Hiori and Nichika will be available on future Parallel Collection banners, but at a much lower rate. So if you want to pick up those cards, now is your only time. As for Toru, her banner is only up until a little bit into next month. So once that banner is over, Toru is not coming back. So if you really want this Toru, this is your only actual time to get her. Starting things off, we have Hiori. Round 7 brings us a Hiori from another timeline that abandons her post as an idol, seeing her start a new journey as a producer. For the sake of gameplay, she's still an idol, and a dance one at that. She attacks all judges with her appeals, applies passive skill chance up after appealing, and her plus effect increases the strength of her passives once activated, though it still requires a good amount of passives to activate while playing the full Illumine lineup. Paracole Hiori is a bit of an odd card in that I think she's maybe the most straightforward use case card we've had for Parallel Collection. While I still dislike how they build her passives to have extremely low activation odds that surely do not have the power to accommodate for that deficit, she's still very solid overall, and her memory appeal has the potential to skyrocket her damage values in a world where looping your memory appeal is the current name of the game. Her roles are center, attack all, and buffer, and I moderately to highly recommend pulling for this Hiori. If you are playing Illumine, absolutely get her. If you are not playing Illumine but want to play Illumine in some fashion, then definitely get her as well. Hiori's initial appeal is a dance 3.5 to all judges that raises your passive skill activation chance by 10% for 3 turns. The plus appeal, which requires the full Illumine lineup, and 6 or more passives active on the turn, which the maximum is 6, so if you have the full passive lineup, you get a passive strength buff of plus 15% for 3 turns. So that adds on directly to your passives, so a 50% becomes a 65, an 80 becomes a 95, so on and so forth. Her 4-star appeal is a dance 4.5 to all judges that raises your passive skill activation by 20% for 3 turns, and the plus appeal is the same conditions, a full Illumine lineup and 6 passives active on the turn, for a plus 15 to your passive strength for 3 turns. Speaking of, her 1-star passive is a dance 60% up at 1 stars that requires it to be turn 2 or earlier, has a 35% chance to activate once. Her 2-star passive is a dance 140% up if Hiori is in your skill history. It has a 5% chance to activate 3 times and comes with a dance plus 100 uncap. Her 3-star uncap is a dance plus 100. Her 4-star rainbow passive we'll get to in a second, but this comes with a dance plus 150 uncap, totaling out at plus 450 dance. Her rainbow passive is a dance 160% up if you have 1 or more passive activation up buffs currently active. So as long as you use any of Hiori's appeals, this passive is live. It has a 30% chance to activate twice and is limited to once per turn. Her memory appeal, when maxed out, is a passive strength plus 50% up for 2 turns that links into a dance 5.0. Her charge appeal is a dance 1.0 to 2.5 depending on which level you have it at, which is determined by both your memory level and the number of copies you have of her. Hiori is another extremely easy to activate rainbow passive, as nearly every member of Modern Illumination Stars can fulfill the conditions on turn 1. It's much easier to manipulate the odds in your favor by having this activated on your memory appeal turn, so there's nothing but upsides here overall. Now, just like Twilight's collection, Parallel Collection does not feature a Hazuki system from the get-go, meaning that any dupes you get will be either really expensive or really rare. It's 2 stars. You almost always are fine to stop at 2 stars unless you really need the strongest charge appeal damage on top of everything else. You get the most bang for your buck at 2 stars without having to entirely commit to multiple sparks on the banner, and the card is still wholly functional regardless. She'll be a valuable asset for Dance Illumine regardless of how many you need of her, so play it out as carefully as you need to. Do not try to overspend unless you really just want to commit to Dance Illumine now and forever. For the support recommendations, the MVP, surprisingly enough, is a limited Yuika, but we also feature some other interesting vocal cards in here. Vocal good stuff returns, but with a little bit of variation. Since the introduction of the new mode, it's now recommended to bring along supports with uncaps for all stats. It's actually also not even that bad to bring along supports that are not related to your attribute at all in order to get said uncaps. But cards that do relate to your attribute and have multi-stat uncaps like Yuika are very strong options for teams like this because being able to uncap your stats without having to spend points is super good in the new mode. so any cards that can do multiple uncaps is always going to be ideal. Beyond this, the standard play for vocal supports works out just as good as always. I can't really add much more to this, as the iteration of the support lineup is about the same as it was the last time we talked about it. Hazuki is still going to be very good here, the Yuika is very good, cards like the visual Natsuha that has all stats uncap is still going to be good, even if she's not a vocal card, and other cards depending on what you are using, such as the MV supports like Kaho, are good if you decide to use characters related to that card on your team, which is something that Illumine can absolutely do. Now for the grades. Hiori as a center gets an A+ to an S. Hiori has the potential to have an absurd amount of ramp up if built correctly. Since her memory appeal applies a plus 50% to passive strength for 2 turns on each use, producers who aim to use her memory appeal in quick succession can see a massive jump in damage on the second appeal. And this is already on top of a 7.5 appeal with a maxed out charge if you go the whole way. It seems really strong on paper to me, and ideally is not that much of a disappointment. And of course, if you are not committed to this, the 2.5 can certainly serve any other Illumine member very well. As a unit, I'm going to give her A+ to S-. I've talked before about how I dislike the direction of Illumine reducing their passive activation chances by absurd amounts purely to sell the newest gimmick. That still rings true with this Hiori, who buoys this with a solid AoE appeal and reasonable passives for her caliber card. She absolutely demands that you run a full Illumine lineup, so adjust accordingly if you only intend to use Hiori and not all 3 members. It is something that you certainly can do if you are just trying to abuse the charge appeal aspect of her, but to each their own. I think this card is still very solid because of her AoE capabilities, but pretty much the whole point is in service of her passives and for setting up Illumine specifically. So next then, we have Nichika. In this timeline, Nichika has abandoned her drive to become an idol and has continued to exist in the working world. While it sounds like Mikoto continues to do her thing in her timeline, we won't really see the true details until later, at the very least, once we see Parallel Collection Mikoto. As an idol, Nichika is a pure vocal unit who goes back to the basics, buffing up Mikoto appeals after appealing, builds up memory gauge, and fully activates her passives by playing a pure She's build. Nichika is a fairly normal card, especially in the face of other Nichika cards. The biggest advantage going for her is the plus 15% memory gauge on both her link appeals, on top of having the infamous charge appeal. Her memory appeal across the board is very consistent because there's no gimmicks tied to it, and should be very devastating to deal with once people build her up. And even then, you can choose to not run her as the center because, again, charge appeals are really dumb, and cards like Mikoto can absolutely abuse it. Her roles are center, buffer, and she has access to mulligan, and I highly to moderately recommend pulling for this Nichika. If you are trying to play Vocal She's, this card is absolutely going to get you there. Nichika's initial appeal is a Vocal 4.0 that buffs Mikoto's appeal strength by 1.0 for 2 turns and grants +1 mulligan. This links into a memory gauge plus 15%. Her 4-star appeal is a Vocal 5.0 that raises Mikoto's appeal strength by 1.0 for 4 turns and grants +1 mulligan, and links into the same memory gauge plus 15%. Her 1-star passive is a Vocal 60% up. If it's turned 2 or earlier, 35% chance to activate once. Her 2-star passive, a Vocal 120% up if you have 2 or more She's members in your skill history. This has a 30% chance to activate 3 times, comes with a Vocal plus 100 uncap. At 3 stars, another Vocal plus 100 uncap. At 4 stars, her Rainbow passive, which we'll get to, and a Vocal plus 150 uncap, totaling out at plus 450 Vocal. Nichika's Rainbow passive is a Vocal 160% up if you have 3 or more She's members in your skill history, and has a 30% chance to activate twice, and is limited to once per turn. Her memory appeal when maxed out is a Vocal 2.5 that links into a Vocal 2.5, and her charge appeal is a Vocal 1.0 to Vocal 2.5. Unlike the previous Hiori we talked about, Nichika's Rainbow passive is technically still easy to activate, but getting there can take much longer. This also means you need to run Mikoto guaranteed to get here, unless you want to take some really roundabout method of getting there on turn 9 or 10 by utilizing a bunch of repeated Nichika appeals at the very end, assuming you could even get past turn 3. I'm going to be one of the few to say that you could arguably get away with only having a singular copy of Nichika unless the charge appeal damage is all you're looking for, in which case just go for however many. She does everything she actively has to do without any investment, which is make Mikoto stronger, and that's all you really care about in that situation. She still has a pretty okay memory appeal even without max charge damage, so you can play around with however many copies of Nichika you prefer. For the support recommendations, the MVP is Hilariously enough, MV Asahi, who we talked about earlier, Dance is in kind of a weird place because of the new game mode, so you're going to see a lot of supports that are out of their element in favor of 1 to 2 really strong supports supplemented by strong passives on the main card and stat uncaps across the board. Case in point here, Natsuha has become a popular pick among players for her uncaps, much like what we talked about the Yuika earlier, making builds in Halo much easier thanks to the abundance of SP. Other cards are really up to your discretion, but popular inclusions are MV Asahi and MV Kaho for their easy-to-use passives on small teams like Illumine, or even like Shiz, as we would probably go to figure, letting you sneak extra characters onto the team for pure benefit. So, because you are only running 2 characters, you could choose to just run the rest of Illumine on the side, or you can choose to sneak in some Stray Light cards, or a Kaho card if you want to use MV Kaho. Because you're running maybe a Meguru, you could sneak in MV Asahi, but that also means you're open to cards like Juri or Asahi. And of course, cards like Hazuki are still going to be very good. The other Hazuki is also not that bad. The one that specifically has the best advice mastery is super good for, say, Halo. So if you had gotten the second limited Hazuki, that's a good option. The first one is also still pretty good. Now for the grades. And I figure before we actually get into the grades, you might have noticed no synergy suggestions for either characters this time. And that's because the new mode has really kind of curbed the idea of synergy really mattering all that much. As long as you have a character that you care about for the team in particular, you can just kind of use it and abuse charge appeals. That's kind of why I've been really hinting at the point that charge appeals are really strong, and people have been taking this to just kind of put whoever the heck they want as the center. It can be this card in particular, it can be any card that happens to be part of the unit. I've seen the standard vocal Mikoto as a center, but I've also seen firm Mikoto as center just because it doesn't really matter. You're getting the buffs from Nichika, and you're getting the charge appeal, so that's all that really matters at the end of the day. Back to Nichika. As a center, she gets a B+ to an A. If you max her out, it's a turn 2 vocal 7.5, assuming you can hit max charge appeal value by the time you get there. Even without a fast uptime on said charge, it's plenty impactful for what it is. What makes it nicer is the fact there's nothing to cause the damage to swing too wildly in either direction, because there's no upside or downside to the appeals, and it still benefits from other Mikoto cards that can theoretically make Nichika appeal stronger if you are going that route. It's the most generic memory appeal in recent history, but it served its purpose well. As a unit, I would say it's a B to an A. I'll be completely honest, I'm not entirely sold on Nichika's gameplay as a card over her role as a center. Her kit is extremely cut and dry with a pretty minimal variation as to what you intend to do. You use the appeal, you make Mikoto stronger, you repeat. Alternatively, you just use the appeal, then memory appeal with Mikoto and repeat, because Mikoto's going to be benefiting from that 4-turn buff to her appeals, which is going to be really strong. Thematically, it makes sense that Nichika has fallen back on Ul Reliable, but may not make the biggest splash outside of she has charge appeal, so it's broken. Wrapping things up then, we have Toru. Fresh out of the Working Date collection, we have Toru, acting as a new vocal support since her previous card in September of 2023. Kinda crazy to think that card was actually that long ago since her last vocal support. Much like some of the more recent supports, Toru has access to a mastery that only has functionality in, say, Halo, but comes with 3 reasonable masteries for those building outside of the new game mode. Overall, she's strong and a fairly direct upgrade for most compared to the last Toru, but she might not be a giant leap for many players who aren't focusing specifically on Noccho-related mechanics. Her support skills include Idol's Bond, Promise Recovery, and Rest Boost, and she has 4 unique masteries. Vocal Mastery SP, reaching +12 at level 75. Vocal Mastery Vocal Limit Up, reaching +4 at level 80. Idea Advice Mastery, reaching +6 at level 80. This makes it much more likely for her to give you the idea advice in, say, Halo. And lastly, she has Vocal Mastery Stamina, reaching +5 at level 80. Her support appeal does scale, starting at a Vocal 3.0 at level 60, becoming a Vocal 3.5 at level 80. Her TFD idea is Vocal, her Insight Token for Grad is Visual, and her proficiency in Landing Point is in Vocal. Toru's initial appeal is a Vocal 3.0, and also comes with 2 Vocal +25 uncaps. Her 1-star passive is a Vocal 50% up if it's turn 3 or earlier, and it has a 20% chance to activate 3 times. Her 2-star passive is a Vocal 120% up if you have 1 or more active evasion up buffs. This has a 20% chance to activate twice. At 3 stars, she gets 2 Vocal +50 uncaps. At 4 stars, a Vocal 3.5 appeal that raises your evasion by 15% for 4 turns, and a Vocal 120% passive if you have 2 or more Toru in your skill history, which has a 30% chance to activate once, with a Vocal +100 uncap, rounding out to plus 250 vocal. Toru gets a B to a B+. Toru is about as good as you would hope for a non-Twice support, with solid passives that work within her kit. She is a direct upgrade to the previous vocal Toru for sure, but it might not be enough of an upgrade to warrant digging deep on the banner without intending to also run Toru on your team. She's going to be much easier to use for Halo teams or specifically Nocchill, much harder for those that are depending on other units, depending on what your goals are as a team. I would moderately recommend pulling for this Toru. So, that's going to do it. Thank you so much, as always, for watching and supporting the channel over the last 5 years and a couple months. This will be, for all intents and purposes, the final shiny review. I have not really been too happy with the direction that Enza has been going the last couple of years, and I really don't want to have to force myself to keep making videos when I'm just not really in love with the game anymore like that. Now, that does not mean the channel is over. I do still have the Say Halo guide, which I hope to have up in the next couple of days alongside a run of Say Halo. But other than that, the channel is going to be going on an indefinite hiatus unless the game manages to make enough decisions that improve upon the game in ways that I think are necessary for the game to continue to thrive. There have been a lot of decisions in the last couple of years that I've really not agreed with and has made the game less interesting to me, and I'm just not really having that much fun with it. I don't, again, want to force the issue of having to make videos for a game I'm really not having all that much fun with. So, hopefully, things will improve, and again, thank you so much for all the support. So, one last time, for now maybe, thank you so much as always for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care now.